Welcome to No Master, No Slave. A show that seeks to reveal the hidden aspects of our world. History, philosophy, science, spirituality, and the truth of that which is. No master, no slave.
Welcome to episode 11 of No Master, No Slave. I'm Mike, and today I'm joined by my friends Zach and Nick to continue our Methods of Manipulation series. We are now in the sixth method, called controlled opposition. Opposition means resistance. It is key for the so-called elite of this world to control the natural opposition that builds up within humanity against the obvious or even hidden tyranny. They know resistance will be built up against the ongoing degradation of human rights, freedoms, and life on this planet. Vladimir Lenin understood how to control this opposition. He said, quote, "The best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves," end quote. And he was absolutely correct in that understanding. To give the people only one choice is an obvious tyranny, and people eventually catch on to this. But if you give the people two choices instead of one, two political parties, for example, this becomes harder to see. They think they have a choice in the matter, and many people live their entire lives believing there really is a difference between the left and right paradigms. The political system of the United States is a perfect and obvious example of this. You have the liberal side versus the conservative side. People think if you aren't this, you must be that. They think because they may see more oppression in one side that their side must be correct. There aren't other choices anyway, so what else could it be? This keeps the mind trapped in the choices offered by the elite themselves and keeps the people from thinking creatively and coming to their own conclusions. While there are many examples of controlled opposition, and we'll go over a number of them today, we'll really try to focus on getting to the underlying psychological cause of why people fall into this trap and how to get out of it. What are your thoughts on this, guys?
The controlled opposition strategy is real similar to your quintessential governmental false flag terrorist attack program. It often flies over the public's head and escapes their awareness in a way that's almost likened to what we would see in a science fiction action film, specifically something like the 1980s sci-fi action flick They Live with Roddy Piper. Because to the awakened observer, this is seemingly so because deception through controlled opposition is everywhere and should be quite obvious to any honest truth seeker with a developed sense of discernment. But with that aside, it's important to bear in mind that state-funded and orchestrated controlled opposition will oftentimes take on the role of nonviolent government dissenters like your modern-day quote-unquote conspiracy theorists, for instance. And in their genuine and natural form, the purpose of these nonviolent government dissenters or opposers is to educate the public and share alternative research and information that differs from and oftentimes exposes the government's official reports and sources. The research, media, and information propagated by honest investigative journalists labeled conspiracy theorists will frequently contradict the government's reports and claims about events, policies, social programs, the intentions of institutionalized hierarchies, and anything else that affects the rights and freedoms of the people. So it's in the government's best interest to control or at least stifle the effects of these honest journalists by infiltrating their networks as undercover agents or paid shills to convolute the truth about any given topic or to discredit entirely any efforts made possible by alternative views or alternative information sources. So the government sets out to control its own perceived opposition by covertly employing agents on the state's payroll, but under the guise of, quote, conspiracy theorists or talking heads in the truth and freedom movement. Rather than putting truth seekers on the right track with their work, these fake journalists or fake researchers aim only to perpetuate fear, paranoia, confusion, or helplessness by spreading sensationalized disinformation that floods the internet and airwaves with deception, aiming to deter people from further research or to distract people further away from the real, objectable, irrefutable, knowable truths regarding what government agents have been up to. And when people aren't doing their own research because they are too afraid or because they deduce that it's impossible to know the truth for themselves when anyone can be an agent, the inevitable manifested conclusion is a divided and compromised truth movement, an unquestioned superstitious belief in governmental authority, and ultimately an ignorant society of people neglecting their own ability to discern and discover truth amongst lies and deceit. And that's exactly where a government needs the overwhelmingly vast majority of the public to be in order to put forward a fairy tale like the 9/11 Commission report or any other fabricated story used in attempt to justify tyranny and the usurpation of human rights and freedoms. And it goes on endlessly until people wake up and think for themselves, because in that state of self-neglect and helplessness, people are easily hypnotized and tricked into selling themselves away to slavery and war because they aren't thinking. They are constantly being told what to think and what not to think from both sides in a state of panic or emotional sensationalism. Because of how much information is available to the public, controlled opposition is a crucial manipulation tactic engaged by the world's occult dominators and manipulators to secure their power on a global scale. The dark occult elite class of psychopaths create and engineer people's champions, or in other words, perceived archetypal figureheads that satisfy the voids created by the suffering of slavery and tyranny. So the same way that government is born out of and supported by the fears and shortcomings in the minds and hearts of the people, the opposition to government is harnessed and dictated by none other than the government through the laziness and cowardice of the people. So this tactic of manipulation is only made possible through the people's ignorance and fear.
And that's what it's really about, is keeping us ignorant. Our ignorance is our choice, so they're not making us ignorant, but they're driving us away from what's more important. And we're giving our faith and our confidence into these authorities that are pushing these either straight up lies or strings of truth that will take us further away from the important truth. So there's these ways to deceive us and get us to not focus on the simple truth of there's people that are going to organize and come together and use violence to enslave people, and there's people that want to be free. So if we get a false dichotomy where we think it's either red or blue, and if you don't like what blue's doing, then you must be red. Well, there's a whole rainbow out there. There's a huge spectrum of options. For them to say it's either left or right, it's either red or blue, that's not correct. The only one true dichotomy is it slavery or is it freedom? Is it supporting slavery or is it supporting freedom? There's a lot of really good examples. There's one right here I've got in front of me about the war on drugs. A good controlled opposition is there's a lot of evidence, and the CIA has been caught. You know, some of the biggest cocaine busts ever were actually CIA planes full of cocaine. And so there's cocaine from South America and Central America, and then there's opium from Afghanistan. You've got a government that's got a war on drugs, and then they keep getting caught shipping the drugs in and allowing the system to keep going. They're making money off of arresting people and putting them in these prisons. The prison industrial complex, it makes a lot of money. The lobbies that are fighting against the legalization of cannabis. So the number one lobby is the prison industrial complex. And then below that, you've got the union of prison guards, and you've got the police union. And then fourth is the pharmaceutical. But the first three lobbies that are opposing the legalization of cannabis are mechanisms of the state that are profiting off of this war. And then the CIA gets caught frequently heading this whole thing up. I mean, opium was almost completely out of the market in the world's supply when the Taliban shut down their opium fields. Then the United States goes in, and from 2001 on, we start opening those opium fields back up, and the production goes out, and there's a lot of exports. There's some sources here because I'm making a lot of claims that are going on. So I'll link to a site on this podcast by globalresearch.ca, which is a research site that is very well cited. And they've got one called Drug War. American troops are protecting Afghan opium. U.S. occupation leads to all-time high heroin production. And I encourage people to, follow up on the sources on that. But this is just another example of controlled opposition. Supposedly, the opposition from the government is the drug war. Well, there's evidence they're controlling the drugs because they're making money on it.
Yeah, and they're also making money from the extorted revenue generated by fines attached to the state-enforced prohibition of these drugs. And that type of coercion and theft by the state's agents is supported by the people because the common person has been made to believe that the drugs that destroy people's lives are put here by criminal gangs and mafias independent of the government, and that the government steps in and acts as the heroic street cleaning service. But in reality, the government is responsible for enormous shipments of cocaine and heroin into this country, and also responsible for violently enforcing drug laws, and from both ends of the spectrum, they're generating revenue. On the black market, working with distributors, and from the prohibition fines, they're making money from both sides of the drug war, all the while filling up prisons with nonviolent drug offenders that will eventually serve to produce cheap labor. Look into how corporations exploit prison labor and how prisons are becoming privatized in America. It's no secret. But with that aside, the prohibition isn't just a clever way to profit twice off of one product. It's also a precedent that's being set by the state, which aims to declare total rulership over one's body and consciousness because they are claiming that they are the arbiters of what people can and cannot put into their own body, which is nothing short of tyranny and slavery.
Yeah, I just want to bring up one example with the whole drug thing, is everyone should look this up. I think 2 Minutemen recently caught CIA moving in 1,300 tons of cocaine from the border of Mexico to America. When they were bringing these guys under justice and just, they were just seeing what's going on with these two, they showed their badges like, we're with the CIA, going back to the organization. So you basically can't touch us, is what they were saying. You have to just let us go, even though we're being caught, and you're showing we're being caught. It doesn't matter. We can continue moving forward. And even though people are literally catching them with their own badges, with 1,300 tons of cocaine, they are pushing straight into America. And regardless, it's up to anyone to put whatever source they want into their own body. That's their choice. But the government wants to try to regulate it. And, they make it illegal, so it makes it even worse to do. If you do try to do even the simple things like cannabis, you get thrown in a cage. And like you were saying, Nick, you're doing slave labor next. And those people so often just get ridiculous time for just nonviolent crimes. If they're not crimes at all, there's nonviolent usage, really. Nonviolent usage of cannabis, or even you have cases of even people trying to treat their own children. So with cannabis oil, I think there was a good case in Australia. There was a man who was treating his own son with cannabis oil and was sent to prison for, 20 years. Not only did you break up a family, but now this kid's probably going to go under chemotherapy and have, a 2% chance, 3% chance of success. Yeah. And even if he is,
that's wild, dude. And it really makes me frustrated because the psychopathic policymakers who legislate what qualifications a specialist needs in order to be permitted to use drugs and medicine and treat sick people, these policymakers recognize that there is an underground gray market of homeopathic doctors and treatment options that ultimately take away business from the government-sanctioned health industry, which also, in effect, creates more sovereignty within the people. And the psychopaths setting policy obviously do not want that, so they set out to recruit other psychopaths or just appallingly ignorant authoritarians with psychopathic tendencies to violently oppose and oppress people who are employing these said homeopathic alternatives. It's like, the people are taking care of themselves for once? Just send in some order followers to enforce these psychopathic policies that restrict people from communing with certain natural medicines. And believe it, there are plenty of order followers willing to snuff out any natural endeavors that lead to goodness and wellness and freedom, which to me is infinitely more disturbing than the psychopathic policy itself, or even the fact that psychopaths are here manipulating and deceiving people in general. The only thing that makes any of these policies a concern to us is the fact that there are brainwashed, mind-controlled order followers out there enforcing these policies violently onto the people. So in this case, it's not very covert, but the occult dominators do control the opposition to health and wellness by putting psychopaths on the payroll to oppress alternative health practices while prancing around like the state is practicing some state-of-the-art medical routines. But in reality, they are responsible for more illness and death with their chemical cocktail pharmaceuticals and their radioactive cancer treatments than any death or illness resulting from naturally occurring conditions and circumstances. So much mind control and deception must be employed in order to keep this lie of the government healthcare system going, because it is doing way more harm than it's ever given credit for, especially due to their suppression of natural, abundant, healthy remedies like cannabis.
And also freedoms too. So we've got like the Patriot Act and all the different things that are happening here in the United States right now. But throughout history, the cycles of totalitarian regimes is to increasingly take away the liberties and the freedom of the people that are there. And the best way to get the people to do that is they'll create a problem. They'll manufacture some false flag terrorism, blame it on some external source, and then say, hey guys, we've got all this terrorism going on. We're going to need to take away some of your liberties so that you can be safer. And people are so shocked and they're so terrified. They're like, yes, please make us safer. Take away whatever, search everything, know everything about us, log everything. Don't let us have guns or weapons. Like, please do it. So that's the thesis, is manufacture terrorism to blame it on someone else. The antithesis is create a police state, take away liberties. And then the synthesis is a removal of freedom and a transfer of power to a more centralized unit. And the only way this is able to play out is if we have a neglected aspect. Because if we have the full picture and we're using our critical mind and we're using the resources that we have available and the trivium method of critical thought to identify information that we take in, find contradictions, inconsistencies, and deceptions, and come to an understanding of what is actually happening, not just what authorities tell us is happening, then we could break this chain of events. When they push a thesis to us and have a false flag operation go down, and then we look at it with a critical mind and see contradictions in it and see that the story doesn't add up, we're not going to play into that antithesis. We're not going to just be like, oh, okay, yeah, you can take our liberties away. We're going to stand up and be like, hold on, this first story you just put out doesn't make any sense. And there's a motivation here for you to do that. So the best way we can get this nation to stop, the average person to stop falling for this, is to spread the information of the neglected aspects and show the verifiable information that these people are working together. One image that comes to my mind in the movie American Dream, it's a cartoon movie of how the international banking system kind of has come up through history and how it funds both sides of wars. Definitely a huge example of controlled opposition. They've got this Rothschild demon bank guy that's on both sides. There's two of them, and he's on both sides of a chessboard. And the chessboard is World War I and World War II, and they're moving the pawns and the pieces around of the different nations, but it's the same entity that's controlling both sides. And we can find that through forensic history, that it is the same international banking apparatuses that are funding both sides of these wars, and they're chopping everything up into little pieces, and they're picking everything up for pennies on the dollar and further centralizing the power. So by going through these artifacts and these primary sources to show people how this is all controlled by the same organization of individuals, we can get that neglected aspect that's necessary, so that instead of us getting the national pride and saying, okay, we're going to World War III, we're going to have to fight these people, we go, hold on, wait a minute. We're being funded by the same people they're being funded by, and their whole agenda here is to get us to fight each other so we don't even realize that they're the actual enemy, and then they can just take us over.
Yeah, it reminds me of almost the false green movement, because you have people almost hating themselves for the earth. They're like, well, CO2 is bad and we need to tax everything. So, okay, well, hold on a minute. Let's look actually what carbon dioxide is. Plants produce it. There's no real issue from carbon dioxide. The problems are geoengineering. If you haven't heard of that, you should look into that. They are the natural, there's a natural climate shift that the whole solar system is going through, and everyone should look into this if they're not familiar with this. It's amazing how few environmentalists ever bring up the fact that our whole solar system's having climate change, not just Earth. Yes, we are beating this planet up badly, but that doesn't make human beings out to be this evil cancer on the planet that must be removed. That ties into control opposition easily. You can justify any type of genocidal or eugenic type legislation or behavior through that. Well, we're doing it for your own good. People are bad. Might as well remove as many as we can. The planet's overpopulated. That's another one. Another thing you always hear is that there's too many people on the planet. No, we're just abusing the resources we have, and we're not making things last the proper way we should. We talk about cannabis a lot on this show, and hemp. Those are great solutions to getting to a truly sustainable, healthy balance between using resources and not abusing resources. There's so many options we can have like that. We need to focus on what are the real issues with the climate engineers, or the climate engineering, the geoengineering. All the real things are happening. But I view the green movement as a big controlled opposition because they're trying to. I view that as people should look into the Agenda 2030 as well. It has to do a lot of this new legislation that's coming out has to do with improving the planet. It all sounds good on paper, but people need to look into this Agenda 2030 thing.
Yeah.
It's really not in the best interest for anybody.
No, and it also aims to reduce human population.
Exactly.
And those are some really great points, Mike. I think it's really important to understand that the government-controlled oppositions that we are faced with don't always manifest as human beings, but can sometimes take the form of a threat to the wellness and integrity of our planet or of our food supply or drinking water. So the criminal government stages and orchestrates unsustainable conditions that are later solved through their predetermined synthesis that sets out to usurp people's rights and freedoms, because it'll be blamed on the people, not on government policies. Their synthesis will be that in order to maintain sustainability with nature, the answer is centralizing power and control to the state at the expense of individual freedoms. So when I think of all this, I see a correlation between all the suppressed or super underfunded technology that would help to create a more free and sustainable society, such as engines powered by abundant renewable resources, or different systems of food cultivation and waste management, or new grand-scale recycling strategies and ocean cleanup systems and landfill reversal systems. It almost seems as if the elite psychopathic policymakers, acting as world leaders, are allowing the world to become heavily polluted, as if they are waiting for a critical moment to sweep in and offer up their Agenda 21 or the Agenda 2030 synthesis that you alluded to, Mike, which is propped up as a conscious and honest effort to create sustainability. But it is really just a justification to restrict human freedoms of movement throughout the earth. The government will be immune to its restrictions, obviously, because the blame will be shifted onto the common people through media mind control strategies. All the blame will guilt people, and the dire living conditions will create a public sympathetic to cutting down the population size and cutting down human freedoms of movement. The government has already staked a claim as the feudalist rulers of this country's land, and it's always under the guise of sustainable development. State parks are always littered with violent, gun-toting order followers on the state's payroll, and they act as agents to restrict the freedoms of movement and utilization of the land by the common people. And the worst is yet to come. If we all keep buying into the controlled opposition, the opposition in this case being the opposition to a clean and healthy planet due to the negative results of human behavior, so the government creates, allows, or supports the destruction of the planet only to shift all the blame onto the people in order to justify its violent solution of oppressing human rights and freedoms and securing more control in the hands of the state. And dare I say, a human population reduction campaign run by the state, and probably even a lot of suicide due to the manufactured guilt. A lot like what we've seen in Chinese culture with the one-child policy, where young Chinese girls have been guilted into killing themselves because the Chinese government doesn't want them growing up to be childbearing women because of the Chinese human population reduction efforts. The mind control and indoctrination is so effective there that children are committing suicide in order to honor their government and their family. Unbelievable. But I can see something like that happening when Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 is heavily implemented and the public is subject to a massive guilt and fear campaign regarding human population and our unsustainable systems of living. I can see people killing themselves and one another out of a misguided sense of moral obligation to preserve the greater good of the planet. I mean, that's some serious mind control, and it would be anchored by the results of human behavior leading to unsustainable living conditions, basically.
Yeah, and then a perfect like solution they offer to kind of calm you down through this whole thing and all this guilt and all these, depression or even anger or even just understanding that there are problems that need to be solved is the New Age movement. There's a lot of good teachings in the New Age movement. I think meditation's great if not abused. I think yoga is great if not abused. And I think there's some validity to the law of attraction, but there's also some gaping holes in that whole concept, because a lot of the New Age teachings teach you to not focus on the negative because you're empowering it, because they do understand a lot of energetics of how the universe works and the electric universe theory, and that's great, but they don't understand that if you're not paying attention to a problem, you're not solving it. You're just letting it fester and grow. It's the same thing with the shadow of ourselves and the shadow of our ego. If we don't look at it, if we don't address that, then it becomes out of control and it starts to dominate the world. And that's what I really think we have here is we have a shadow that's become so large that it's becoming the norm. It's becoming the big giant elephant in the room, that it's taken over everything. It's just because we're not looking at these problems, because ignorance and apathy are just running rampant in this world. There's a lot of people who are standing up, though. That is very encouraging. But the New Age movement must be called out for what it is. And again, I'm not doing a whole blanket statement here. I think there's a lot of good people in it teaching great things, and there's knowledge to be gained from this movement. And I mean, meditation is great for stress relief, and yoga is great for a solid body and a very athletic body. But to just focus on, I'm just going to be blissed out in my crappy job that's screwing me over every angle. I can't afford any food, but I'm going to just imagine it's organic food because I can't afford real food. And then, it just goes on and on and on with it. You will never bring criminals to justice. You're never going to bring war criminals of 9/11 and Gaza to justice if you don't focus on them. Where's the empathy in that? And also the whole law of attraction thing. It's like, how is a child being assaulted under pedophilia? These poor kids who go missing. I mean, the cases of missing children are astronomical. And they don't make sense until you figure out that there are satanic pedophile rings out there, and they're involved in high-level government. Jimmy Savile is a great person to look up if you're not familiar with him. He's a well-documented pedophile who I think he tortured like 500 kids or something like that at least, and he was running free, no problem. I'm sorry, if you had even one case of that, even one conviction that should have been looked at immediately, this guy is allowed to go on living his luxurious lifestyle with 500 cases against him, and it's like nothing. But this is the kind of stuff that's coming out and should be addressed now. And to ignore this is to not have empathy. I don't understand where people don't see this. They don't see that children suffering, people innocent suffering around the world, and the whole human race and the planet suffering, that's a serious problem. I wonder if a lot of New Agers even look, or people who say don't look at the negative, that doesn't even make sense. Do you focus on the food and water you have, the air quality? Even in New Age circles, they try to eat organic food. I mean, isn't that looking at some type of negative? Because you've obviously figured out that GMOs are a problem. So you're obviously recognizing some aspects of it, but you're just not going as far as you should.
Well, a lot of them have fallen for the trap that was created in this whole movement, is to create a slave mentality. And there are people that are affiliated with a lot of these ideologies and that I'm friends with. And they tell me, by me researching and focusing on this negative stuff, I'm actually making it manifest, as if I have the ability to make macro systems in this world manifest just by thinking about it. That the collective group of people thinking about the shit that's wrong in this world are the people that are making the things that are wrong. That is such a twisted, screwed up way to look at things. There is an objective reality that we are inside of, and we live within that. And my thoughts do not create macro events in the world. They're confusing some truths on one level with something that doesn't even apply on another level. We can get a bunch of people to meditate around a thing of water, and it'll change the alignment of the atoms in that water. So when we make a snowflake out of it, if we're meditating on something that's coming from the framework of love, then it's going to have a lot of harmony, and it's going to make a very sacred geometry. But if we're meditating on fear, it's going to have a lot of disharmony and look kind of like different. Yes, so there are ways that our electromagnetic expressions that flow off of our body affect things around us, from the way our heart and our thought are aligned and moving and our pulsations are going out into the world. That's on one level. Me thinking about a predator that's coming to me is not what's making that predator come to me. In fact, if I put my head in the sand to try to hide and not think about that predator, my ass is in the air and I'm going to get screwed by it. And that's the reality of what's going on. So with this controlled opposition of a lot of these different things, but particularly the New Age movement, they'll take maybe 90 or 80% truths that are really important that'll have to do with the New Age movement. It'll have to do with the internal qualities or the sacred feminine qualities, the non-material qualities of existence. And they'll share those teachings and they'll suppress the masculine external forces of how we work with the world around us. And that's what leads to the slave mentality. If you think that by trying to do action in the world to resist what is wrong is what's creating it, you are under mind control and you are in a slave mindset. And that is why this opposition was created. That's why they took these teachings that are ancient and powerful and are logical, and then they steered people away from the balance of it. And another thing that happens with this is somebody will find something that's not true in a movement that's been co-opted, like the New Age movement, and then they'll throw it all away. They'll say nothing in that is valuable. And that's, I would argue, is a huge reason that they do this. They're not only doing it to suppress the sacred masculine by pushing an overemphasis on the sacred feminine, they're doing it so that people throw away the valuable teachings of the sacred feminine also. Because somebody will look at it and say, dude, that New Age bullshit, it's all mumbo jumbo. Like crystals don't do anything. Organite doesn't do anything. Meditating doesn't do anything. It's like, yes, it does. There's a lot of evidence that it does. There's scientific empirical information that we're getting more and more of every day that it does. There's Kirlian photography that can photograph these things. There's experiments that people can do with their gardens, with crystals and with organite materials. The food grows better in this. There's tests that you can do on your own. And then logically, it makes sense, that there is an energetic relationship that we have with things, and that meditation is very valuable for an individual whose left brain is super hyperactive and they're just concentrating all the time. Well, meditation allows the right side of the brain to get in the game a little bit, which connects the heart. There is proper places for these things, and people are throwing the baby out with the bathwater and not even giving it the time of day because of the controlled opposition.
I want to ask you guys actually a quick question. What do you think about mass meditations? I found that they've been very useful, and I've even seen studies that they can be very effective. And I'm not saying that don't take action. I'm just saying combine action with maybe occasional mass meditations. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I'd say that, anybody, whether you have a specific type of meditation or not, or whether even if people just coming together and fixing their intent on something, I can see as being very useful, because not only are you unifying towards one goal, but you're cutting out all the clutter. You're cutting out all the nonsense or all the extra stuff. So whether you're sitting there in the lotus position with 100 other people doing the exact same thing, or if you're sitting in the lotus position and there's 99 other people doing 99 other techniques or methods of meditation or focusing their intent on something, I can't see how it wouldn't be useful or how it couldn't set the stage for doing great things, because we're fixing our focus and spending our time and paying our attention onto something. So something will manifest. But I don't think that just sitting there and intending on doing something and not ever doing it is going to do anything. So I think the meditation aspect of the group mentality would just get everybody on the same page so that they could take proper action.
If we're all sitting around meditating about how we need to not be thinking about the predators that are out there, and we're all meditating on inaction and meditating on slave thought, then no, that's not good. But if we're sitting around and having a unified thought about how we can raise ourselves and the world spiritually and raise the intelligence and the courage and the care, I think it can be good and bad. That's, again, part of the controlled opposition. They want us not doing a damn thing. They want us sitting around in circles on meditation pads thinking that that's all we have to do. I think it's valuable, and I think it's half of the equation. So I think half of it is in the etheric realm, half of it is in the spiritual realm, and the other half of it is feet on the ground. So we got our head in the stars, and we got our feet on the ground, and we got to have a good balance between those two things. We're not going to make it happen. If we just feet on the ground and we don't have our head connected with the greater cosmos, then our heart's not going to be as in it, and we're not going to be as spiritually connected with each other in the universe. And so our feet are going to be running around the ground, and we're going to start like voting for Republicans or just get completely lost about the greater principles. And if our head's just in the stars and our feet aren't on the ground at all, we're going to be like, well, I can just weight test this GMO food and hold it up and see how it feels, or I can just meditate on this fluoride before I drink it, and then I'll be totally fine. It starts to get ridiculous. So we do have to have that balance. So we're not floating away into la land, and so that we're actually spirit warriors here on the ground and aware of the greater interconnectivity of everything.
Mm-hmm. I think shamans are a perfect example of that balance between the spiritual realm and the physical realm, because they understand, what's going on in the spiritual, but they use that as a guidance system for their action in the physical world.
Definitely.
Doesn't
the word shaman, isn't that bringing someone out of the darkness?
Yes.
Yeah, and so there's a couple other words alchemy is from the dark, chem is dark. So alchemy, shamanism, and then there was another one. Doesn't the word educate mean bringing out of the darkness?
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, there's quite a few different words from different regions and subjects that talk about bringing people out of the darkness. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's very. Those are great points, man. It's really important to understand the words that you're saying. We people have forgotten what we're actually saying, and we need to come back to an understanding of what the words are that are coming out of our mouths actually mean, because they have a vibratory frequency that does affect physical matter and people's emotional state, mental state, and spiritual state. And like soldier, for example, it's soul dire, really, when you break it down. And what does SOL really mean? Doesn't that just mean the sun? So even if people don't see, okay, well, that's not the word soul, you're seeing things where they aren't there. Well, okay, just look at the light of the sun being the soul. It's similar, SOL. So then you have the S soul dire. Why would you ever call yourself that when you really they wouldn't say it like soul dire. They can't say it like that and you want to be a soul dire, join some recruitment guy comes up to you. Most people, even who are interested in the military, they'd probably have a second thought if someone came up to them.
Do you think they would? I mean, the Marines call themselves devil dogs. And they bark all the time. I was at the bar the other night, and there was a group of Marines, and I wasn't trying to send negative energy of thoughts towards them. It was mostly like I feel sorry for people that have put themselves in an order-following position where they're following the orders of psychopaths. I was there for 7 years, so I wasn't like angry at these people, but I was observing them, and they were literally barking and chanting devil dog. So, I mean, I think they could come out and specifically say soul dire, and they would just be like, soul dire,
Okay, that's true. That's true. When your mind's in that fragile state, you can't be manipulated to do almost anything. That is true.
Well, if the group accepts it.
Right, yeah. I mean, that gets into the war. Talk about controlled opposition. War is one of the biggest ones. You've got this enemy here, and we've got to go fight them to defend our country by invading another country based upon lies, because everyone was in a state of total fear. I mean, again, 9/11, that was such a mind control op on the whole, really the whole human race, but especially America, is so traumatizing. It just stuck people in a reptilian state of mind, and it allowed us to just view these people as the enemy because the media told us. And people weren't using their higher thought functions like their neocortex, which totally shut down because they were in the reptilian mind due to all the stress and the fear and the anxiety. And they created that new enemy for everybody, the endless war on terror.
Yeah, and the endlessly expanding definition of what a terrorist is, which basically includes all people of Earth, not part of the government.
And then it's also interesting if you look into Saudi Arabia, how, if anyone's going to talk about any extreme type of groups, some of the most extreme groups that, maybe are Islamic do come out of Saudi Arabia, and they were our allies anyway. If people aren't familiar with this, they should look into the connection between the Bush family and the Osama bin Laden family, the bin Ladens. It's crazy to see how connected they were. And their one jet was flying, I think it was like a private jet that was flying right after 9/11. It was a Saudi jet. So then they just portrayed this particular group of Arabic people that these are the bad guys. We should go after them, even though if you look actually into the research, the whole thing is so full of holes it's not even funny. It was just to create division between people. I guarantee you most people in this country would get along with most people of those countries. There's really not that much division. I mean, any division is really manufactured by these governments to get to push these wars that the media talk about. A real terrorist organization. It's the media they have pushed so many wars and broken so many lives, pushing this total propaganda on people, and people eat it up. They're not doing enough research, and they're not thinking outside of this controlled paradigm of left versus right, of blue versus red, and they're buying this lie that, oh yeah, we need to go over here to defend our country, blah 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 blah. Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, and on it goes. It keeps the war machine running the whole time. The bankers are going to the bank while you're going to the grave.
And Donald Rumsfeld gave those chemicals. The United States gave chemicals to Saddam Hussein, and then it's like, oh, he's using these chemicals. Where did he get those chemicals? We gave him those chemicals. There's a picture of him shaking Donald Rumsfeld's hand. And then with Al-Qaeda, it's not really disputed that we created Al-Qaeda to fight the Soviet Union so that we could support the Afghan war against the Soviet Union, which was really over the natural resources that we were trying to lay claim on, didn't want the Soviet Union to take. And then when people look back on it and they're like, oh yeah, well, that didn't go very well, or we did that kind of wrong because it led to this radical. You think that was an accident? You don't think that we funded and created Al-Qaeda so that we can have an excuse to go over into that region and take over more resources? Like, how many different times does this have to happen? The origins of ISIS? Ben Swann, again, we talked about it in a previous podcast, but if you haven't seen it yet, The Origins of ISIS by Ben Swann at Truth in Media, there's really good evidence that we created, funded, and continue to support ISIS. Why? So we can have an excuse to go over to these other regions and take over their natural resources. We got to create an enemy over there, create an enemy fabricated or real, and then go over and get that enemy just to get the natural resources. Don't see how people don't get it.
That, and also control water too. It's insane. Now there's literally wars for water. As valuable oil is, water is becoming the new most valuable resource. Look at California. I mean, this is a little off topic, but look at California. You have Nestle, who was bottling up water when California's in a drought, which was manufactured by geoengineering. Just go to geoengineeringwatch.org and you'll find a lot of evidence for this, and all the fact that aluminum, barium, and strontium particles are heavily found. The levels these particles are at is way beyond normal, way, way over the limits of what they should be. And they create this drought, and then Nestle goes and bottles up all this water, and the wars now are being fought over basics like that. And now we have to pay for our own basic life form. Well, that's what these privatized companies were really no different. They work hand in hand with the government. It's just pure corporate fascism. It's no different. But that's what they do, and it just creates this endless cycle of war, which is really what the bankers they always desire that. I mean, they're always making out in the end. They can make money on every single thing, and we always have to pay attention to the money aspect of what's going on here. And you can really find fingerprints of what's going on if you follow the money, and it always leads back to these international bankers who play both sides off each other, and goes back into the false green movement again. You have people saying, oh, look what we're doing to the earth. Look at California. It's this massive drought. But it's amazing how people don't see how geoengineering is creating that problem.
They have to find that information. So it's a neglected aspect for a lot of people. Some of the best information I point people to is on Mount Shasta. They have this thing that's called a filtration line. When you get to a certain point of elevation, because of the pressure differences in the layers of the atmosphere, pollution from the ground cannot or does not get up above this certain line. And so the hikers would melt the snow on Mount Shasta and drink it, because it's like goes to this natural process of distillation coming down to the earth in the form of snow. But they still test it, and they were finding many thousands of times the amount of aluminum in this snow. And there's no way it could get there unless it was coming from above it, from planes dropping down on it. And so we're finding high quantities, into the many thousands of times normal quantities of aluminum, barium, and strontium. People are finding it in their hair. People are finding it in their blood, in the water, in the air, in soil. And there's a whistleblower from the Air Force. Do you guys remember her name?
No, Kristen Megan?
Kristen Megan. So she was working with hazardous material and basically logging it when it came into this Air Force base. And they were bringing in massive amounts of aluminum, barium, and strontium. And there's also evidence that to the proportions that we're finding this in is very similar to the waste product of coal ash from these coal plants. So there's a lot of different ways they could be pulling this off for like little to no cost. And there's a lot of evidence that they are doing it. And then they're going to blame it on carbon, which is what the basis of life is. For us to say something is organic, we say that it's got carbon in it. And carbon is a far less effective greenhouse gas than water. And atomized aluminum, barium, and strontium are really good greenhouse gases. Then you got the United Nations. You got scientists working for the United Nations that come out and they say, hey, you know, in the future, we got this plan where we're going to drop millions of tons of aluminum into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight. And what do you guys think about this plan? You know, it's really going to be a no-cost issue. We've got the resources, and it's going to help reflect sunlight. Well, there's evidence they're already doing it. So they're probably taking like 3 or 4 steps forward, and then they're going back and legalizing what they did 3 steps ago so that when people do find out about it, it's like, oh, no, it's legal. Yeah, no, we already talked about all this. We've been doing it since the late 90s, but it's all legal now, and we're just trying to save you from the sun. When really they're polluting the planet. And then there's also seeds that are resistant to aluminum. And so they're going to control the food supply by putting so much aluminum in the soil that only the seeds that are genetically modified to be resistant to the aluminum will grow. They're poisoning the planet, and then they can manipulate the weather systems with this. And if anybody wants to look into a non-classified military document called Owning the Weather by 2025, just Google that. And they've been planning this for a really long time to use technologies with microwave transmitters from the ground, like the HARP facility and the many other facilities that have like that, where they have these huge antennas that are set up over many square miles, and they shoot millions of watts of microwave energy into the ionosphere, and then it will refract back down, and they can angle it and then basically heat up certain areas. So they cause a pressure difference to move weather systems around. So if they can spray stuff out that'll cause weather patterns, and they can shoot things from the ground that'll cause weather patterns, there's good evidence that they already can do all this stuff. Then they can cause droughts, blame it on cow farts and carbon dioxide. And and so when they say we've got man-made global warming, maybe we do have man-made climate change, but it's not because of carbon. Mm-hmm. It's because of these secret government programs that we have all this evidence for.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't that be the ultimate control opposition, too? You could just literally you could use the weather as a weapon, have no fingerprints on it, and then you could create chaos in another country that you desire, and you could really do whatever you want with that. That is the ultimate weapon in controlling the world, in controlling warfare.
Yeah, you know, they create that opposition, or they create the threat by twisting up all kinds of things in the natural world, and then they blame it on us, or at the very least, they'll offer up a solution to that natural opposing situation. And that is the synthesis that leads to more tyranny, more control, more centralized power. It doesn't have to be a gang or a thug or a dictator or some agent provocateur or some type of manipulator or deceiver in the media. It could be a situation, an event, or a circumstance that leads to the opposition of our health and wellness. And so, like I said earlier, you know, they'll do all kinds of things to trash the earth or to create all kinds of chaotic scenarios in the earth or on the earth, so that people are in that chaotic, confused, fear-based place, and they're reaching out for the government to help them, to save them from this situation, this circumstance, whether that's an aggressive threat made by other people or something that's threatening their well-being and survival in the natural world. They're at the point now where, yeah, they're controlling even that stuff through chemicals and through technology that isn't available to the public. And obviously, if they have the fourth branch of government, the media, on board, people aren't going to really be hearing about this stuff unless they go do their own research. And when you bring up a lot of this stuff to people who don't do their own research, what's their response? Well, if that was true, they would tell us on TV.
What are you, a conspiracy theorist?
Yeah, don't want to be one of those people.
Anderson Cooper's story is pretty interesting. I think it's even on his Wikipedia page, but if not, it's easy to Google. If he was an intern for the CIA when he was in college. Well, I can't prove that he's in the CIA, but I can say that a lot of the stuff that he peddles and that comes out of his talking head mouth supports operations that we can find the CIA affiliated with. So for him to have had an internship and now be a huge spokesperson in the mainstream media, it's a little skeptical. I don't have a smoking gun on that one, but I got a pretty good feeling that Anderson Cooper's on a CIA payroll.
Well, did you see the We Are Changed video with Luke Rudowski confronting Anderson Cooper about these very claims? He got nice. Very. You've seen that?
Yeah. I did. I remember now. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, his own reactions and his own. Just watch his face and watch how he reacts. It really betrays him. It really shows. I mean, what's going on? You backed it up with facts. I'm pretty sure that he has heavy CIA ties. I just want to bring up one other control opposition I was thinking of, just for the future, not right now, but something to pay attention to. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Project Bluebeam and, like a staged alien invasion, but I mean, it's seriously something to consider that they would try to pull that card in the future with the amount of technology, holographic technology they have, and even military craft they use that can parade around as UFOs. I think there's a TR-3B people should look into. It's actually military, I'm pretty sure, I can't say for certain, but I have a good hunch that it's a military black ops craft. It might even be older, but it definitely looks like a UFO. And I think those might have been in the Phoenix Lights. But anyway, what better reason to have a world government and a world police force than an invading outside force, than invading an alien force for total centralization and total control over the planet and what better reason to have total surveillance and domination over everything that comes in and out of this planet.
And just like 9/11, there is a lot leading up to that. There's a lot out there that supports your claims that there very well could be a staged alien attack here soon because of, like you said, it would result in a unified global government, or at least the sympathy of the people to unify the world under one government or one military. And when you take into mind the predictive programming tactics of mind control agents, you look at movies, you look at TV shows, you look at comic books, you look at cartoons, anything like that, video games, you'll see there is constantly being put into the collective conscience this idea of aliens from other worlds that are infinitely more technologically advanced and infinitely tougher and smarter, and we're just hopeless without the aid of a global government or a global military force. So that's being put into the collective's unconscious repeatedly through the media. And when the day arrives where they stage that, it's going to play out, like a song. Everything's going to be played out in a way that is likened to what we've seen in the movies already,
I do think we can actually avoid all that if we stay aware and stay out of fear, though. Because if we keep exposing these ideas before they happen, people will notice. I mean, I think we've prevented a lot so far. I think we've prevented the whole World War III thing, whether that's kind of going on covertly or not. That's up to debate. But I mean, I think we've honestly prevented a lot. I mean, look at the Ebola thing. Really, that was
nobody's even talking about that anymore.
Yeah, well, exactly.
There would be nothing more refreshing than just an epic fail on behalf of the government trying to stage an alien invasion attack if it just went wrong and everybody was just already ready for it, or you know what I mean? Like there's just the right people exposing it. If something that huge failed epically, dude, that would be so funny. It'd be so refreshing. And at that point, I think I would really split the species up, because anybody that's still sympathetic to a government after screwing something like that up and being exposed on that level, I mean, dude, those people are not going to come out of their slavery.
No.
So that'll be really interesting to see. I mean, we live in exciting times, and if something like that occurs in our lifetime, that is going to really be a game changer.
I know we're about to wrap this up, but we had mentioned Skull and Bones and talking about the controlled opposition of politicians behind the scene. Did you guys see the two interviews? I think it was Tim Russett. It was at CBS where they interviewed two different occasions, interviewed John Kerry and George Bush before the election when they were running against each other about how they were both members of the select fraternity from Yale, Skull and Bones. It's only 15 people a year join this fraternity, and they were both postgraduate members of this fraternity. And they both had the same response when he asked them about it. It's like, well, we can't say anything about it. It's a secret. And then he ends up dead, like however long after that. What are the chances that two people running against each other for president of the United States were both part of a fraternity that only has 15 members in it a year?
Yeah.
And there was a book called it's
Fleshing Out Skull and Bones?
Was it that one? It's I don't know. It was Anthony Sutton, and it was a part of it was how the order controls education, and I forgot what the other. It was like two books in one. But dude, that was an awesome read because it follows the people that we know from their own words or from other documents were part of Skull and Bones, follows them through their life when they get into like their 50s and 60s, and they end up in these really high paying positions and influential positions of like finance and politics all over the world, whether it's with some huge company or some political position or something in the military industrial complex. And then they meet up every year at this little island that they own and have a secret meeting. And they're all in these influential positions. And then you got two of these guys running against each other as president. That's not controlled opposition. I don't know what it is. And then you can look back at the funding of who's supporting these different people as they go through their campaigns. And you can see Goldman Sachs is the number one supporter for pretty much everyone that's running against each other for president. So if you got Goldman Sachs in everybody's pocket, and you got these two guys that are from the same fraternity, how do people not see that this is controlled behind the scenes?
And then when they're exposed or confronted about it on live TV, they both have the exact same reaction. They both kind of laugh it off, shrug it off, said that it's a secret, can't talk about it, moving on, dodging the question.
Mm-hmm. It's just a rich boys club, guys. There's nothing to see here. Move on. Ignore the fact that the guy got killed quickly after his interview.
Yeah, they're just duck hunting out there. That's all they're doing.
Well, I think that wraps it up pretty well. You guys have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, there's probably only about 15 more hours of conversation about controlled opposition we could do.
Yeah, I know.
And it's really important for people to have a sense of discernment when they are taking in information from different sources or news sources. I would never recommend or suggest people don't look at certain people's research or look at certain information coming from places. I think you should look at it from everywhere, but have some discernment. Question what the intentions are behind the delivery of the message or the message itself, because you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. A lot of times they use truth to draw people away from it and to get people down a path of deception. So take in information from all sources, but just have your spiritual and emotional and mental discernment on high alert, especially when you're getting into fringe topics or controversial issues, because there's going to be a lot of sensationalism and content that pulls on your emotions and plays on your emotions one way or another, because if you come across real truth that is scary, it's going to have an effect on your emotions. Now, if it's constantly playing on your emotions and constantly working to get you in a state of fear or helplessness, that's when your discernment should tell you, hey, there might be an agenda here. But don't let it deter you from researching and having your facts straight and your sources straight and your story straight, ultimately. Because if you get caught up in the emotions and if you get caught up in that dialectic of, hey, it's either good or it's bad, then you're not going to go certain places and you're not going to get the whole truth. So just have your discernment up and don't be afraid to go places that are scary or that may potentially be disinformation or something that might pull you away from the truth. Because if you take that in, even if it's not true or if it's based in truth but there's a lot of lies in it, you'll get better at pulling the golden nuggets, amongst all this garbage that's out there or that it's shrouded in. So don't let controlled opposition or the fear of people lying to you and trying to deceive you keep you from going forward in your research and knowledge accumulation.
Take what's good and leave the rest.
You got it.
And always remember, no masters, no slaves.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk next time.
See you guys.
No master, no slave.